Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Jake with Exodus. On this week, we are headed to one of the best places on earth for giant whitetails, and we are in a special part of Iowa with Chase and Keegan Rohlfsen. Now, these guys bought a parcel of ground, built a hunting cabin, and it turned out fantastic. You get to see some of the whitetails they've killed over the years, how their hunting cabin is set up. It's a really cool episode. We hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe, and then hit that bell notification so you see when next week's episode goes live. Let's go.
Hey guys, come on in. I'm Chase Rohlfsen.
And I'm Keegan Rohlfsen.
And this is our home away from home that we call the cabin. Let us show you around. So after watching a lot of the episodes, I figured we'll just jump right in and start with really big deer. So come on this way and I'll show you kind of what started the whole obsession. So these deer here are pretty popular on social media because I run a company called Rubline Marketing, and one of our clients, Full Range Hanging Systems, introduced the bracket here. And so these deer have been pretty popular and photographed quite a bit as we launched that campaign. But I'll start off with a deer we call the Judge, and the Judge was really the deer that started my, I'd say, whitetail obsession. I had killed other deer before, but not to the extent of what he put me through. He's not a huge deer by any means, but he was an old deer and he was extremely difficult to kill. I ended up taking a top section of a ladder stand that total equated to maybe 5 feet, shoving it into a cedar tree and ratchet strapping it with about 15 ratchet straps, just to try to get on this deer because he never would go near any big blocks of timber. He was a wide open buck, so it was the only way I could figure out how to kill him. And I was fortunate enough to put an arrow in him one morning. I believe it was like 2004 is when I shot that deer. So over here, this is a deer that we had named Fireworks. He had lived on the farm since he was probably 2, and it was a big pursuit. Both my son and I were after this deer, and we had battled a couple really bad cases of EHD. One morning I was in the stand and the sun comes up and I was watching some deer on the ridge, and this deer was bedded about 80 yards in front of me. I watched him try to get up and fall back down, and he was up and he was down, and I immediately knew that he had contracted EHD. So I climbed down from the stand. I put, couldn't even really call it a stalk, but I was able to put an arrow in him. And it's a sad way to harvest a deer, but EHD is such a brutal disease that I was really glad at least that I was able to finish him. This deer is Combine, and Combine is my largest whitetail ever taken. And I arrowed him after the year after I passed him, and everybody, kind of my buddies, thought I was crazy that I had passed him. But he went from 160, probably 5-inch deer to 180-inch deer. Over that year's jump. So of course, when I had a second chance at him, I rattled him in. He literally came to the base of the tree. It was a chip shot, maybe 8 yards, and was able to put an arrow through him. So definitely one of my, favorite stories to tell. I went up in the stand at noon. I was going to plan for an all-day sit, and I had an arrow in him at 12:15 probably, and he was in the back of the truck by about 12:30. It was just the craziest thing after, several year pursuit and seeing his trail cameras and everything else. So that's Combine. And then some various sheds here that we found throughout the farm, and sitting on a bourbon barrel because that's my other passion, is bourbon. So we'll go on kind of the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to big deer, but is equally, in my opinion, important as big deer. So this little guy here was my daughter. She was 10 years old at the time. That was her first deer. At the time I had 2 children, and they both took to hunting right away, which was great. I love it. So that was her first deer. So of course Dad had to mount that for her. And then fast forward, this was her 3rd deer over here, and up until this year, that was her biggest. She blew that record away this year. We don't have that deer back from the taxidermist obviously quite yet, but that was her 3rd deer there. We have never, ever actually taken one with velvet still on it during the Iowa youth season. So that was kind of a pretty special deal. I was with her, of course, on every hunt. This deer here was one of my son's earlier bucks. He was pretty young. I can't remember how old he was, but that was such a neat story because we had taken in a foreign exchange student who was from Indonesia. So as you can imagine, this Indonesian foreign exchange student had zero exposure with whitetail hunting. So we took IU, it was her name, and we took her out to the blind with us, and she loved it. She loved deer meat, of course, and we had so much fun sharing our experiences with somebody from a different country. We still stay in touch. We FaceTime and video chat still today, and of course this was many, many years ago. She's a young woman now with a career and everything, but that was neat to bring somebody from another country who had no exposure to whitetails with us. We will step out here a little bit and talk about these two deer on this double system. So my son Keegan, he was the one that actually harvested these. He is probably more obsessed with whitetails than even I am. So Keegan, I'm trying to think, how old were you when this was the guy you shot first, I think, right?
Yep. So this was my very first deer hunt by myself.
Yep.
So I came down to the cabin when I was about 16.
16, yeah.
And went out, and I said I'm gonna do it on my own. And I went out and shot a 170-inch deer. So I'd say it's pretty good deer for the.
He finished up a football game and he told me, he says, hey, I'm gonna run down to the farm and I'm gonna go hunt this deer. And of course I'm like, no, your mom's gonna kill you. She's not gonna let you drive by yourself. It's a couple hours to come down to the cabin here. And he's like, I know what I'm doing. I've been hunting long enough. I can do this all by myself. And he had called me that morning and he said, hey, I got eyes on that deer. And I'm like, okay, make sure you sit there again that afternoon. And he goes, nope, I'm moving. And I'm thinking, he's never gonna see the deer again. I mean, what deer hunter's gonna move? You saw him in the morning, don't move. Well, he moved, he didn't listen to his dad, and he had called me again at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The deer came in, he was lip curling, he was scratching his back, he did everything you could ever want a deer to do, and he put an arrow through him, and of course, he never listened to dad again because he was right. But this was a neat muzzleloader. You'd shot him with a muzzleloader. Yep. I think it's kind of a tie between you and your mom on the oldest deer. So this one got aged right around 9.5 years old, which is crazy to think all they go through that they can actually make it that far. But he was definitely, you could tell on the downward slide, but still a giant. And none of us knew the deer, so I would love to know what he would have looked like in his prime versus just the crazy thick rack that he's got right now. So yeah, so let's go into the other bedroom, call it the master bedroom, I suppose you could say. And so we'll start with this deer over here. That was a really fun hunt. That was my wife and I. It was supposed to be a deer that she was going to shoot. He was, a nice older deer, but just not great genetics. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. Well, she couldn't get her muzzleloader up over the hay bale. We were kind of in a makeshift blind that we had done and piled up a bunch of hay bales. She couldn't get over and she was just like, please, I want you to harvest it, and I can't get the shot off. So I ended up putting the muzzleloader on him, and it was great because it was kind of our first hunt together, and we've done a lot of that ever since. This deer here has got a very strange name. I call him the 529 buck because the last picture I got of him was on May 29th of the year that I harvested him. And I had seen him probably a half a dozen times with my own eyes. He figured out how to avoid my cameras, and he was always just a step ahead, it felt like. But we started to figure out his pattern. He would always take the same trail if we had a northeast wind, which was a really rare wind for us. So Keegan, at probably the age of 12 or 13, during youth season, had him and got busted pulling his bow back. So he had a shot at him. My wife had an opportunity at him early muzzleloader, but she lost light before he came into range of her muzzleloader. And then I put an arrow in him somewhere around mid-October, I think it was, mid to late October. And he was officially my first grow spoon. So that's the 529 buck. So come around here because there's two great stories on these guys here. The Impala is my daughter's from Africa, another one of her African animals. But I want to tell the story here about these two Western animals. So when my wife started hunting, we all have that one animal that we want to pursue. A lot of us are whitetail guys, and others are, maybe it's an African game or whatever. Her obsession was pronghorn antelope. And so for her birthday, I said, I'm going to take you on a great antelope trip. And I didn't know anything about it. So I worked with 7J Outfitters, Jeff and Deb Smith, fantastic people. Called them up, said, I want to surprise my wife. They helped me through all the paperwork. And so that's what I was able to do, was give her this as kind of her birthday present. And we pull in, and of course it's a camp full of guys, as a lot of hunting camps are. And Jeff Smith, the owner, says, "This is so cool. Like, we've got this woman in camp." He goes, "I'm going to be your guide personally." And he owned the place, and this is a pretty big outfit. So we were out there, and we see him at 280 yards. And, you know, we're Iowa folks. We're either shooting it with a bow or, you know, at best, we might have a 100-yard shot with a muzzleloader. We're not long-range rifle people. But she had practiced, and she felt good about it. So she's prone, or up on a kind of a rock canyon. He's 280 some yards away, and she can't get comfortable. And finally, she's going to kill me when she knows I tell this story. Jeff says, "You know, what's the problem? You know, you don't seem comfortable." And she's like, "I can't." She goes, "I'm getting pricked down there." And he kind of looks, and she rolls up, and she's literally got a cacti right here. And that's why she can't get comfortable. She can't figure out what keeps poking her. So he kind of rolls her, and he grabs that cactus, you know, and he pulls it out of the ground, and she settles back down, and she goes, "Oh, that's so much better." And she executed a great shot, and that goat ended up going 77 and a half roughly, which was way bigger than anything in camp that had been shot by the guys. And so she was definitely the hero in that camp, so it was fun seeing that experience. And the mule deer, when I turned 40, I said that was a birthday present to myself. I had always wanted to take a velvet mule deer with archery tackle. So I was lucky enough to get an opportunity in southern Colorado. After about 3 or 4 days of going after him, I was lucky enough to put a great shot on him. He didn't run far, and I think I ran out and got a Coors Banquet beer after that, because I was just like, how perfect is that? You know, I'm going to have a Colorado beer and a velvet muley in the back of the truck. So that was a kind of a fun deal with that. So we'll coming up the stairs here, and I got to show you a couple more animals. So this one here, this was my daughter's first turkey, but that's not even why it made it so special. The neat thing about this turkey was my son called it in for her. So Keegan was probably, I'm going to guess, around 14, and she was probably 11. And I literally sat back and did nothing. And so when you see your kids grow that much, and you know, he's now taking the reins and calling turkeys in for his sister, it's like that was a super special special bird to have mounted. Again, back to the kids, it seems like a lot of this is about them, not even me. They should be telling the story. Axis deer, in my job and at marketing, at Rubline Marketing, we do things like riders hunts. We'll entertain guests, things like that. We were in Texas, and we were trying to get a group of outdoor riders on free-range axis deer, and they're super spooky. And anyway, we had a few of our riders that were successful, and we were finally starting to knock some down. And one of the guys in camp, one of the guides looked at Keegan and said, "Hey, do you want to sneak out, see if we can't get you on one?" And they weren't out maybe an hour, and that morning they came back with this guy. And so I told them, the company, of course, had to pay for this big outfitted deal and get all these riders on it. So I said the mount had to stay here at the cabin. He didn't get to take it home. So come on up here. This is a couple really early deer. And this guy here was he was a bow kill from down in this area. Not a real great story. He had come in with a pretty busted up front leg. And you know what? I just said, I'm going to shoot him because his leg was so messed up. So not a lot of story on him, but this guy was my very first whitetail. And I had started bow hunting, I think, when I was around 21, 22. And he was the first, you know, deer I had ever shot with a bow. And in the county that I live in, he was a really big deer for the time. So he's the kind of special story to talk about, and definitely got me hooked on archery hunting. So over here, two things. Well, my dad's a huge inspiration. It's funny, he's not a hunter, but my dad's just an extremely driven individual, driven to succeed, driven to do the right thing, driven to just work hard and be a perfectionist at everything you do. So I have this sitting here, which is up in my away from home office. And that's just a bunch of his wrestling stuff, because he was super competitive in the wrestling world. So I keep that there. That's a special thing to have in my office. And then over here, I'm a bourbon guy. Like, I love different kinds of bourbons and the pursuit of bourbon. This shed is a shed from this year, and it's sitting there with a bottle of Blanton's. So Blanton's is kind of tough to come by up here. So this deer is offspring of a deer that we called Bad Grandpa. Now this deer we call Swoops. So he's a second generation of horrible, horrible genetics. They are bullies. They try to run every deer off the farm, and they're pretty successful at it. And we have chased after Bad Grandpa until finally he just disappeared. We're figuring he died of old age. And now we're trying to pursue Swoops. And so he is a major mission. So if you ever see a hero photo of me grinning behind this short-tined rack, you know the story, because we just can't seem to ever get him killed. So that bottle of Blanton's is going to get cracked open when Swoops finally hits the ground. And I don't care who it is, my son, my wife, my daughter, somebody hopefully will get that guy. So I keep that here to keep me motivated that I hope to put a tag on that bully of a deer. So speaking of bourbon, there's the bourbon collection for the cabin. Should you ever come down and share camp with us or tell stories, there's a pretty good chance we're going to do a fresh crack on one of those bottles there. So let's go back down the stairs. I want to show you 4 deer that really set the tone for the space that we're in. When I built this house, I started building the house in 2015. I finished it in 16. There was a few things that I wanted to make sure that it had. And behind me is really the centerpiece of the entire house. In 2014, it was the first time, and it still has not been repeated yet since. 2014, everybody in my family was successfully harvesting a whitetail on the property. So it started off with my daughter during youth season, and hers is going to be on the far right. She was 11 years old, and she thought it was so cool because it's an 11-pointer. And so that was her story, and if you can imagine an 11-year-old harvesting an 11-pointer, that was her spiel at school, was how she made it happen because she was 11. And then the deer next to it was Keegan's, my son Keegan. That was his first bow kill, and I was with him. And I want to say that was, probably right about that middle of October. Go over to the far left. That was a deer that I called Twizzler. I had never harvested a deer on Halloween before. And I was able to put an arrow through Twizzler there on the left on Halloween. And so now we've got my daughter first, my son second. I shoot this giant deer, and now we've got to get my wife a deer. And man, did we hunt. We hunted and we hunted. So the boys were all with bows, and the girls are always using muzzleloaders. So in Iowa, we're lucky because our season extends to January 10th. So we are hunting hard through Christmas. I think we even spent Christmas down here at the cabin. And it flips to the new year. I think this is like January 2nd, if I remember right. 2014 was a long time ago. Well, this deer comes in, and I'm going to tell you, 1, I've never seen a 7-pointer like that. 2, we don't know the deer. 3, she's saying, "Are you sure he's big enough?" And I'm thinking, if she doesn't pull the trigger, I'm going to just double up that year because this is insane. The deer's fantastic. She makes a great shot. He goes down right away. Keegan and Dylan, they're in another blind hunting on the other side of the property. Of course, we call them. We're like, "Kids, get over here." The whole family did the recovery together, and there was tears. There was like just happiness. And so when I decided to build this house, I said, there's going to be a major wall in the house that just those 4 deer reside on. And that's going to be an extremely special memory to always come back to, because it was the one year that everybody in the family got to harvest a whitetail all on the farm, and super special time. So that picture, I look back on it in my phone all the time of when we were all together and surrounding the deer and just talking about the stories of it. So that's that wall. And then of course my wife had that made, which sits there showing all of the pictures from when we actually successfully pulled it off. So I think that about covers everything in the house. It's getting late. I feel like a bourbon, so hope you enjoyed it. You need to get out.